The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song is a retelling of the Mulan story, but this is far from what Disney envisioned. Song's take involves murder, drugs, domestic violence, assault, addiction, and a host of other unscrupulous things in an attempt to make a more gritty and grounded version of the tale. If you ever wanted a grimdark light version of Mulan, this is the book you'd probably get. So what is it about? Essentially, this book tries to blend elements of Chinese folklore, fantasy, and a dash of Disney's Mulan into a single narrative. We follow a character named Mei Lin, who is clearly modeled after Mulan as she embarks on a journey of self-discovery in the midst of a war between the three kingdoms. She's trapped in a home she despises, with a father in the throes of opium addiction and facing a betrothal to a violent husband with an ill temper. And that's when Mei Lin decides to disguise herself as the bastard son of her father and enlist in the military. So again, we're following a similar trajectory of the Disney story, albeit different. Once in the army, Mei Lin must navigate hiding her femininity and pursue a place amongst the guys. As the kingdom hurtles towards destruction, the four divine beasts, a sea dragon, a phoenix, a tortoise, and a tiger, make their return to the realm. It's a coming-of-age tale that attempts to explore themes of identity, honor, and sacrifice. This section is going to contain spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, go to the timestamp on the screen for my thoughts on if you should read it. Now, what makes The Night Ends with Fire good or bad? I gotta be honest, there isn't too much good here that is original. The best parts of the book are the ones that follow the Mulan story that we all know. I did a mini review in progress the other day where I read through about the first 50% of the book in one night, and I enjoyed it. But I think that was nostalgia talking. I have so many fond memories of watching Mulan with my younger brother on VHS that I was reliving those scenes in my head. And now that I've finished the book, I'd say The Night Ends with Fire moves from paying homage and more into the territory of copying. The book lifts scenes directly from the movie and sprinkles in some gratuitous violence to give it a more edgier feel, but it comes off as cringy and unoriginal. It's almost like Disney Mulan fanfic that managed to get published, albeit in a very beautiful, beautiful cover. I really like the book. And I don't mean this to come off across as a disparaging to the entire community, but it just feels very young adult in the worst kind of ways. And it's despite not being marketed that way. The characters are all flat, they're poorly developed, and entirely one-dimensional. Let's look at Mei Lin, the protagonist. From the first moments we meet her until the end of the novel, she remains a prickly and edgy child. Her ideals are entirely selfish, she never moves past this, and as a result, she never grows. And part of what makes coming-of-age stories so captivating is that we see growth in our protagonist. You see conflict, in this case Mei Lin wanting to escape her station in life. You have the struggle, or Mei Lin trying to blend in with a male-centric society and finding her place in it. And then you're supposed to have the turning point. That turning point may be progression or some kind of devolving, but it leads the character to development. In the case of Night Ends with Fire, we don't get any of it. We have a child only concerned with herself on the first page, and we have a child only concerned with herself on the very last page. And the relationships feel like they've been written by someone who has never been in one. It's all very weird. The relationship with her father is one of abuse. The relationship with her mother is only spoken of in terms of PTSD because she flung herself into a river and never returned. The would-be relationship with her betrothed is abusive. Her time in the military is abusive, partially because Mei Lin is such a bad soldier. Even her relationship with her community is one of abuse. It's like Song was trying her hardest to make this place awful and only managed to create a caricature. The worst part is that at one point Mei Lin compares herself to those around her, and she realizes that her life wasn't all that bad. But then she quickly devolves back into, nah, I'm a woman and the world hates women. We could have had our turning point, but it was just a throwaway line. Then we have the weird romantic relationships. One look at Prince Sky, the principal love interest, and Maylin is completely head over heels. Never mind the fact that he tortures her a couple of chapters later. Let's forget all about that and go back to loving him because he's handsome. Then we're introduced to another would-be love interest who, once again, has Maylin tortured, and yet we still get scenes of how attractive Maylin finds him. It's certainly a choice to have every relationship be one filled with violence. The friendships that made the original Mulan so enjoyable are completely missing here, leaving us with a cast of characters that are as dull as they are unmemorable. They're just poorly done. We see Maylin build trust with her core group of friends, saving their lives and saving them from torture multiple times, just for them to turn on her because, you guessed it, she's a girl. It's so hard to believe that these people who spoke of loyalty and camaraderie are the first two characters to turn her over to the authorities. But enough about relationships. The pacing of the novel is very, very fast. So much so that I forgot nearly all of the characters' names because we don't spend enough time with them. Each chapter has so much meat left on the bone, and as they turn into essentially small vignettes that only serve to get our character from point A to B without much happening in between. Maylin's stepmother, who is partially the impetus behind her escaping, is no more than a plot device. She could have been such an interesting character if she was fleshed out, but we don't get anything outside of random thoughts of her every few chapters, and it's very frustrating. And speaking of, characters come and go so quickly that you don't care if they live or die. There's a courtesan who comes into the story in the last 5-ish% of the book. She's quickly murdered, and Maylin absolutely loses her shit over it. We spent maybe 2 chapters with this person, and they were a throwaway. It's hard to build emotional connections with characters when they're not fleshed out and we don't spend any time with them. You have to give us a reason to fall in love with characters. And I'd love to talk more about the 4 mythical creatures, but there really isn't much to tell. The sea dragon plays a minor role despite the premise being he is the puppeteer pulling Maylin's strings. The phoenix is trapped and useless outside of one key scene, and the 2 others appear in one line and then they're abandoned. I was so excited for them to play a role, but they're just kind of pointless outside of providing a power fantasy for the 2 characters controlling them. It's also wildly absurd that Maylin, who has proven basically incompetent the entire book at controlling the sea dragon and his powers, somehow can now defeat the phoenix wielder who has been mastering their powers for, like a decade or longer? And, maybe it's just a minor quibble and I'm just thinking about it now, but every time Maylin talks about her kung fu, I kept picturing Neo strapped to the chair saying, "I know kung fu." It was ridiculous. Show us your kung fu instead of telling us you know it. And lastly, I promise this is the end, is very obviously going to be a series of books, and we know that by an abrupt ending that says, and I'm not kidding, "to be continued." Should you read it? I honestly don't know. Again, I had a lot of fun with the sections that mirrored the Mulan movie, but everything outside of that was pretty bland and amateurish. Maybe I'm not the core demographic, but I don't know who is. The martial arts sections are very poorly written, so it's not that. The romance is very childish, so there won't be a craving for that. Even people who want to live out a power fantasy will be disappointed by how repeatedly Maylin proves to be incompetent. Maylin is not even a good representation of girl power. In the end, The Night Ends with Fire feels like an Orientalist fever dream rather than a respectful exploration of Chinese culture or folklore. It's unoriginal, it's poorly executed, and filled with cringeworthy moments that make it a tough read. While I usually try to be understanding when it comes to diaspora authors and their different ways of engaging with their cultural heritage, this book just missed the mark entirely for me. But, that's just my take. If you've read it, let me know what you think in the comments below. Until next time, happy reading.